Over 2,500 players entered the transfer portal before the window closed on Tuesday, but a lot of them are living on an eligibility prayer.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, joined today by our regular guest and the host of the Locked On College Basketball Game Night Show, Leaf to Lean, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day here, well into the off season of the college basketball season. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day, and remind you that you can all listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music, and that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Folks, the transfer portal window is officially closed. We do expect to hear some trickling players who are entering the portal over the next couple of days, as programs have a couple, 48-ish hours to get that paperwork officially in. But for now, the portal is closed. 2,500 plus college basketball players have entered the portal. We're going to talk about that staggering number. We're going to talk about the trend that we saw over the last couple of days, in particular, of players who do not have any more eligibility entering the transfer portal, what it might mean, why they're doing it. It's confusing. It's strange. Lots of different stuff to talk about with that topic. And then we're going to talk about some of the last minute entrances, not a big group that we expected necessarily, but a few kind of fun names that entered the portal in the last 48 hours before the thing officially closed. And then Leaf and I are going to close out the show talking about the best names still available. Some of them pretty obvious names like PJ Haggerty, RJ Lewis. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about a few other of the bigger names that are still out on the open market. But Leaf, we got to start 30-day window, condensed from 45 days. Yet we still saw a staggering number of players entering the transfer portal, 2,500 plus. I think it was Jeff Goodman estimated 300 or so of them were walk-ons at their school. And then a huge chunk of them, which is where I want to start the conversation, are these guys who ostensibly don't have any eligibility left. Some of them, maybe they have a waiver case that we're unaware of, or maybe they have a waiver case that does seem like they could win. But a lot of them, it's just like Jaden Zachary is a great example of this dude played 4 years of college basketball and he played 31, 32 games basically every single year. There's just no real obvious reasoning why you would be granted an extra year. And again, the list of players, I'm not going to read all of them, but Ian Shefflin from Clemson, Chase Hunter from Clemson, Julian Reese from Maryland, Dawson Garcia from Minnesota, Elijah Hawkins from Texas Tech, St. Thomas from USC, et cetera, et cetera. A huge list of players. Leaf, what was your kind of initial response when you saw this kind of trend start to emerge of all these players entering the portal who really don't have eligibility and are just kind of hoping for a prayer from the NCAA to change the rules?
Yeah, I think it's a little wishful. But honestly, I respect the ingenuity of it. If you're gonna see all these people making tons of money for playing a sport that you didn't make the money for part of your collegiate career, might as well try. I don't necessarily think it's right, but in a climate where a lot is not right, why not try to make some money? I will say the funniest thing I saw was Perry Ellis entering the transfer portal because he played 4 full years and he'd be in the same boat. That got a good chuckle out of me. And but that's the point. It's all these guys who played 4 years for all these years are done with their eligibility. So why should it be new? I don't think they should. There could be a case by case of some players that played fewer games in their freshman season or had an injury and didn't quite amount to 30 games each season that I could live with getting a waiver, but I don't think it should be an all-encompassing thing. But honestly, I commend the ingenuity of trying to play college basketball longer.
And I think it kind of lines up with so many other, my viewpoint on so many things in the modern era of college basketball, which is this. I don't blame the players. I don't blame the players who leave mid-majors after 1 year to go get a big payday at a power conference school. I don't blame players for even leaving their high major programs if they can get paid somewhere else. I don't blame players for kind of threatening to enter the portal and renegotiating their contract or their salary every year with their respective school. I don't really blame players for doing any of that, because you are now in an environment where you can make life-changing amounts of money while playing college basketball. It would be silly to not capitalize on that as best as you can. So I don't blame the players for any of this. I don't blame this particular group of players for entering the transfer portal, despite the fact that as of now, they don't have any more eligibility. Like, it totally makes sense to me why they would do that. It's just odd. Like, it's just, I feel more for fans who are confused. Like, why is Ben Gregg entering the transfer portal? He spent 4 years at Gonzaga. Why is, Dawson Garcia? Like, it doesn't make sense that these guys are, and then fans get excited. Like, should we go after so-and-so? Should we go after this guy? And it's like, well, he's not really eligible. So it goes back to the same issue we continue to have with college basketball. If we're not blaming the players, there needs to be some level of consistency. There needs to be some ruling, some hard and fast rule about this, because being able to enter the portal just to keep your options open is, of course, something players are going to take advantage of. Why wouldn't you? If you're, again, I'll use Ben Gregg as an example. Like, he's not going to be an NBA player. He's negotiating contracts right now to play professionally, probably overseas. But if the opportunity to play college basketball arises and Gonzaga, and it, happens a month from now, 6 weeks from now, whatever, and Gonzaga's already filled that spot or doesn't have room for him, you keep your option open to go make potentially hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars playing somewhere else. So I get it. I get why players do it, but this is way outside the spirit of how this is supposed to work. And I think that's the frustrating thing, is like, this is just not, it's another thing that makes this sport frustrating for fans to follow, confusing for fans, and ultimately just dilutes the product's kind of watchability, in my mind, at least. And until we get some kind of ruling from the NCAA and the House settlement and all that, and they say, this is it, this is what we're doing, it's just going to continue to get murkier and murkier. And I think that that's a net negative for the sport.
See, I largely agree with you, but in the case of Ben Gregg, he came in while in high school and joined late. And does his eligibility have a different tenor to it than someone like Ian Shefflin, or, like you mentioned, Zachary, someone like that who's played 30 plus games in each season? Because he didn't play many of those games after coming in middle of the season. So does his eligibility look different? And, like, Ben Gregg, so does that change the belief in his camp of, oh, I might be able to get this, as opposed to some of those guys?
Yeah, I think it was a fifth year thing, though. I think he played like 15 games, and then he played 4 full years after that. And one of them, he didn't play very many games because he was buried on the bench. But I think ultimately he still did have 4 full years and that extra goofy half year from the COVID year. So, and there's some other situations like that, like Efton Reed was kind of one of the first players to enter the portal without eligibility, but his situation was, he was one of those two-time transfers who suddenly got eligibility in the middle of the year. And so he only played like 28 games that year because he missed the first 6, and he's trying to get an extra year because he missed like 2 weeks of basketball, which is feels like a stretch. But again, shoot your shot. Like, if you're not going to be an NBA player and you can make literally the same amount of money playing college hoops as you can, overseas in some cases, why not? Like, why not go for it? I get it why they're doing it, but yeah, there's going to be some individual cases that I do think get some extra attention, but there are also some cases here that just very obviously, it's like the dude played 4 years. He started 33 games every single year. There was no disruptions. There was no COVID. There was no injuries. He just wants to get a 5th year. And again, shoot your shot. But a lot of those cases, I don't think will get a whole lot of traction, barring a complete rule change in the middle of the offseason, which frankly would be not surprising, but would be very, very frustrating for coaches, players, fans, etc., if something like that were to happen while rosters are being put together.
Yep.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for this conversation. We're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the final hours of the transfer portal being open. Not a ton of super exciting entrants, although we do have 2 pretty big guards that entered the portal. We're going to talk about those and a few other big names, all coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan your long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure we're on the same page when it comes to our finances, especially now as we've added a 1-year-old into our life. Thankfully, with Monarch Money, managing your money with your partner and your family is smoother than ever before. You can track shared and personal accounts, set long-term goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still continuing our conversation here in the first hour's post-transfer portal window after it is officially closed Tuesday late night. And Leaf and I are going to talk about a handful of last-minute additions into the transfer portal. And two of them in particular that I want to focus on are USC guard Desmond Claude and Arkansas guard Boogie Fland. We'll start with Claude. He spent 2 years at Xavier, 1 year at USC, so still has an extra year of eligibility. There's no mystery about his status at this point. Claude, 6'6" guard, 16 points, 4 assists, 3.5 boards last year at USC. Not a great three-point shooter, but he's a great at attacking the rim. Very, very talented scorer. Obviously, USC has been making a ton of moves in the transfer portal, both in and out, as Eric Musselman tends to do. But I'm very interested to see Desmond Claude. Seems like a guy who's going to get some serious attention in the portal. And then, of course, Boogie Fland, Leaf, a guy who really good at Arkansas last year as a freshman, suffered that injury in the middle of the season, and then Arkansas sort of got better after he got hurt, which I think was unfortunate for Boogie because it almost made it look like he wasn't as impactful. I think in reality, it was just a situation where there was too many cooks in the kitchen for Arkansas, with John L. Davis getting a more on-ball role, helped him develop for Arkansas and kind of made that team a little bit smoother, but it wasn't due to Boogie being not good or anything like that. We can talk Desmond Claude, but Leaf, I want to start with Boogie, and I want to specifically ask because he is made it very clear that while he is entering the transfer portal, his goal, his plan, his vision is to go into the NBA draft and to be drafted and to start his pro career and to not return to college basketball. I know you're somebody who follows the NBA draft closely, who contributes to the Locked On NBA Big Board show. What is your kind of read on Boogie Fland right now, especially with that injury-riddled season? Do you see him as a guy who could potentially come back and try to boost his value, or do you expect that he's going to be in the NBA next season?
I expect him to stay in the draft, and there may be some teams that like what he does. He's a jitterbug type of scorer who can create, and I think could be a bench piece. I do think the fact that Arkansas got better when he was out does not bode well for his draft stock, because someone of that height, you need to truly contribute to winning to make a team believe in your individual ability. Because Boogie Fland, if you look at his efficiency, wasn't particularly efficient either. It wasn't like he was putting up great numbers and they were losing. He was not putting up great numbers and they were losing. So I think there's a better chance than many would believe, based on him saying he's 100% focused on the draft, that he returns to collegiate basketball, because I don't know if the feedback he's going to get is going to be the most positive, but it really only takes one team. Boogie Fland's been a big name. He's had a track record since high school, and NBA teams really value that. Like, there are teams that have taken players because of their high school performances as opposed to their collegiate ones, and it's worked out. Peyton Watson was a first rounder. He was poor at UCLA and went in the first round, won a championship with the Nuggets. There have been instances where this has worked out, and there have been others where it says, like, what have you done for me lately? So it's a team by team basis. I wouldn't be stunned if he comes back. He's obviously going to be a hot commodity, but I mean, you still have to honor his word and say he's more likely to be in the NBA draft than in college basketball.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I mean, again, the money that you can get in college basketball, if you're going to be a second-round pick for Boogie, a guy who was projected for the most part to be a first-round pick, and then the injury happened, and then his stock kind of dipped a little bit, and now he's kind of more in that late first, maybe even second-round conversation. And at that point, yeah, if there's millions of dollars to be had in college basketball, and not only a huge payday for returning for a sophomore year, but also an opportunity to play a full healthy season and maybe improve on the things that he needs to work on. In particular, finishing around the rim was a big weakness for him, and certainly one that I think is going to scare away some scouts of like, hey, if this dude's struggling to finish around the rim in college, what's that going to look like in the NBA? He's already undersized type of thing. But the catch and shoot stuff is really good with Boogie. The jitterbug, like you said, I mean, I think there's a lot of upside, and every year you spend in college, that dream of your upside kind of dims a little bit just because you get a bit older. But it's a little bit easier to stomach returning to school and delaying the start of your NBA career if that comes with a $2.5 million paycheck. And somebody like Boogie Fland, even if it's a late decision, like even if he pulls out of the draft, towards the last minute, there's still going to be a team out there or teams out there that are going to pony up some big dough for him if he does want to return to school. So I definitely don't think this is as cut and dry as he's making it out to be. I do, as you said, I take him at his word. He is planning to be in the NBA draft. He totally should. I think that's the right decision, but it's going to be up to what the feedback that he gets is. And ultimately, I wouldn't be stunned if there's enough of that feedback that makes him decide that, hey, it's maybe worth it to go back to school. And would certainly be a wild turn of events if he does return to school and makes that decision in late May or something like that, because that's suddenly a really big name, a player that's going to be highly coveted, suddenly re-entering the portal process. And that's kind of what happened last year with a lot of NBA draft guys, but Fland would be a very notable one were that to happen for the Arkansas guard.
One that would be really interesting would be if he performs well at the NBA Combine. I think he's gone because he's the type of guy in that setting that if he shoots well and attacks the drop coverage that likely will be played and knocks down those jump shots and orchestrates an offense better than his opposition, which he very well could, it looks good. It's typically catered towards older guards, tend to be more well equipped in that setting of scrimmages and standing out. But Boogie Fland's not your average like college point guard as a freshman. Like he knew where he could go anytime he was on the floor. It's just a matter of making shots and performing up to the caliber that was set for one of the most talented rosters in the country. It wasn't like he was a terrible basketball player. It just didn't live up to the expectation of being what lifted Arkansas to the top of the SEC. Strangely enough, they made the Sweet 16, could have made the Elite Eight. But I think the Combine will tell a lot. I think the conversations he has at the Combine, I attended the Combine the last 2 years, and there's 2 days where it's cut off completely to media, and it's just NBA teams watching these guys and doing interview after interview after interview. So I think you'll get a good sense, not only from how well he performs in drills and the scrimmages, but how he does in those interviews, if he's coming back or not. And at the same time, I think he'll have some navigation of, hey, how's 2 million sound? I can be a good point guard in college, I promise. And that'll happen too.
A couple other late entrants into the transfer portal, guys that it was announced that they're entering the transfer portal within the 24 hours or so of the portal closing. I'm going to read off a few names here, Leaf, and some brief stats on these guys. And then I'm going to kind of let you pick which one of these guys or two of these guys potentially that you want to discuss. I will start with Sean Stewart, former top prospect who spent 1 year at Duke and then spent last year at Ohio State. It was that Ohio State front court of Sean Stewart and Aaron Bradshaw that they were really hoping would kind of be these two sophomore breakout candidates. And it didn't happen for either of them, unfortunately, for the Buckeyes. Stewart was okay. He averaged about 6 points, 6 boards, shot 54% on 2-pointers, only played about 18 and a half minutes per game. Fouls were an issue for him. Now he's looking for his third home in 3 years. You also got James Scott, speaking of bigs, from Louisville, 6'11 sophomore, spent a year at Charleston and then followed Coach Pat Kelsey to Louisville. Was very good last year, 7 points, 6 boards, 1.5 assists. Incredibly efficient, 78% on 2-point attempts last year, but he was not a 3-point shooter and was under 44% from the free throw line. My man can finish right at the rim, not a whole lot else in the profile for Scott. Travis Perry from Kentucky enters the transfer portal, a homegrown kid who was a freshman last year, buried on the depth chart, actually did some okay stuff, but was incredibly inefficient as a scorer, and then got buried even more on the depth chart with them adding Jalen Lowe and a few other players, Denzel Aberdeen being a big one for Kentucky. So now Perry's looking for a new home in the portal. We got Rashawn Ejie from USC, 2 years at Bowling Green, 1 year at USC. He's got 1 year left, 9.5 points, 4.5 boards for the Trojans, shot 39% from 3 last year as a 6'8" forward. So that'll get him some attention. And then Lamar Washington from Pacific, spent 2 years at Texas Tech and then followed Coach Dave Smart, who was an assistant coach at Texas Tech. He took the head coaching job at Pacific. So Washington followed him out there. Had a great year, was an all WCC player, had a 40-point game, including a game-winning 3 against Washington State for the Tigers. Very talented point guard who should get some high major attention. Leaf, lots of different names there, lots of different kind of profiles. Is there anybody in particular you want to talk a little bit more about?
James Scott's the one that intrigues me the most, particularly because they brought in so much talent in the portal.
Yeah.
Like Louisville said, look, we are a basketball school through and through, and we haven't been one for a bit, so let's just pour in the money. Like, yeah, they made the tournament. They were an 8 seed. They lost in the first round. That's great, but we're the type of team that can win a national championship. So their portal additions, if you look at the odds of championships, they're in the top 5. And if
Mhm.
you look at preseason rankings, they're littered throughout the top 10, and their talent's there. So it's peculiar to me that James Scott left
Yeah.
because he was a guy that I thought had more growth potential and wasn't a finished product and
Mhm.
could grow with a better team. Their team was good. Chucky Hepburn was an all ACC performer, but he's
Mhm.
not the true point guard type where you get a guy like James Scott who can be a lob threat and score
Mhm.
offensively in that regard. He was just a run and jump defender, and I thought he had more growth to him. So the fact that he wasn't recruited over necessarily and they
Mhm.
had so much talent on the roster made it seem strange to me that he's leaving. Um, could he return? Possibly,
Mhm.
but I think that that's the one of these guys that I think is the best player. And he was on a team that I foresee being a top 15 team in the country much of the next season. So that one is the most intriguing to me.
Yeah, you know, I think James Scott's intriguing too. We know Ali Khalifa redshirted last year. He's not going to redshirt this year. And then Kason Pryor announced he was coming back. But by all accounts, James Scott was going to have a decent slash big role for Louisville. So it is a bit surprising that he's in the portal. Be curious if it's a money thing, if it's just keeping his options open thing, if he does return or what the situation is there. But yeah, certainly a player who could make a big impact wherever he ultimately ends up. Leaf, now that the window is closed, we're going to talk about who are the biggest names still available on the open market. There's a lot of really talented players who are testing the NBA draft waters, who are also in the transfer portal. We're going to talk about some of those names to close the show coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still joined here by Leaf Tulane, still talking transfer portal as the window officially closed late on Tuesday night. We talked about some of the last minute guys to enter the portal. We talked about the long list of players who entered the portal who at this point do not have any more college basketball eligibility. Now we're going to take a look at just a general list of the best players at this time who are still available in the transfer portal. And I say at this time because when I wrote this list a little over an hour ago, Dylan Mitchell was on it, but then he has committed to St. John's. So this thing is changing on a minute by minute basis. But as of right now, there are a lot of incredibly talented players still available in the transfer portal. Leaf, I'm going to read a few of them here and we can kind of stop and talk about them because quite a few of them are guys who are also expected to pursue the NBA draft and are kind of going through that process. So I want to talk to you about those guys and kind of get your read on how many of them you think are actually even going to return to college basketball. So that would include RJ Lewis from St. John's, who of course entered the transfer portal after a disappointing finish to his career with the Red Storm, where he got benched in their NCAA tournament game against Arkansas after a struggle. Darion Williams from Texas Tech, incredibly efficient scorer and offensive player, two-way wing type for the Red Raiders. Jameer Watkins from Florida State. He's tested the draft waters before, had a very effective season for the Noles this past year. And then Cedric Coward from Washington State, who's choosing between Duke and Alabama for his final 2 schools, but is also expected to pursue the NBA draft process. So you got Lewis, Williams, Watkins, and Cedric Coward. Leaf, I know that you haven't done all of your NBA draft scouting, I'm sure, for this upcoming draft, but out of those kind of 4 players, do you expect many of them to be back in college? Do you think that's a group of guys who are going to ultimately be in the NBA? Kind of what's your thought on that group there?
Yeah, I've heard conflicting reports about Cedric Coward on how
Mhm.
likely it is that he goes to the NBA. Some
Mhm.
say it's a likely thing because there's feedback saying even some teams have in their top 15. And if that's
Mhm.
the case, then he's obviously going to pursue those dreams.
Mhm.
And if it's not, he's going to get a substantial sum. And I've
Mhm.
heard it's likely going to be Duke.
Mhm.
So uh, I don't know the true of that, the
Mhm.
true side of that. If it'll depend how highly regarded he is at the NBA combine and by
Mhm.
executives, but those are the 2 options I've heard about. As for RJ Lewis, Rick Pitino was saying that the reason RJ is going to the portal is largely to pursue his NBA career. I don't know
Mhm.
if that's someone who's lost a really good basketball player and they're just saying like what's what's got to be said, or if there's truth
Mhm.
to that. I
Mhm.
almost believe it's got to be true because there would be a harder front saying like, look, you were the
Mhm.
Big East Player of the Year. I've heard Auburn is the leader in the
Mhm.
market on that one. Who knows if that's true? These are all speculative, but I
Sure.
could see RJ return because he's not a very good shooter. He's a good athlete, but I
Mhm.
think you could go to the SEC and be excellent. So I think he might come back and attend Auburn, but apparently the focus is on the NBA draft. A
Mhm.
lot of these I think are 50-50, and
Mhm.
those two are the ones that intrigue me the most because I've seen this school that has emerged as the favorite, or at least I've heard has been the
Mhm.
favorite, and then both seem to think that the NBA is more likely. So those are the two that really puzzle me because I find it strange that a team would say, "Hey, we've got this allotment for you," and then they're like, "Yeah, we're going to the NBA." Like, doesn't that mess up Bruce Pearl's roster next season, or doesn't
Yeah.
that for John Shire? Like, shouldn't you allot so like have a backup plan? And I'm sure Auburn and Duke both made the Final Four, and they
Mhm.
certainly have plenty of money. So there's a lot of teams that would be hosed more if they lost out on these type of guys. But at the same time, those are the type of teams that can get all these guys. So when they dry up and there's fewer of them, it becomes more pressing. I'm sure those teams will be okay, but that it really makes me think that college basketball's timing of this has become more and more interesting, particularly because so many people commit before the tournament's even over.
Yeah. Yeah. The conversation about the timing of all this could be a very, very long show if we wanted to get into it, because I'm with you. Like, you commit X amount of money, you save X amount of money for a player, they decide to stay in the draft process. At that point, the pool of talent available to you to sign is limited. It just kind of leaves you high and dry. I'm sure teams are frustrated by that, but what can you do? You could choose, well, I'm not going to go after any of those guys, but there's some of the best players available. So you don't want to do that to your team either. It's just a messy situation. And it goes back again, speaking of timing, that's kind of a good segue to PJ Haggerty, who Isaac and I spoke about when he kind of first entered the portal on Friday. But Haggerty enters the portal somewhat late in the process. And the report is that he's looking for $4 million and an opportunity to start. And I mean, again, I don't really blame him for asking for that. You're entitled to make your demands and say your piece and say what you want. Haggerty was, as a All-American last year, incredibly talented player. I'm not even saying he doesn't deserve that, but you wait until a lot of teams have already, filled out their rosters, made big moves, added talented players at the point guard position, and now you kind of hamstring yourself a little bit. So it's just kind of an odd situation for somebody like Haggerty, who's so talented, to now be like, making demands like this. But our team's going to, the teams that have that kind of money, who have $10+ million in NIL funds, a lot of them already made those moves and filled up their spots. So I'm just curious what that's going to do for a player like that, who I would imagine is probably the best. It's between him and Lewis, I think. Maybe Darion Williams in that conversation too, in terms of the best player who's still available. But Haggerty is somewhat limited by his demands and everything like in that conversation. But certainly an incredibly talented player who is now on the market.
Well, the other thing that happened with Haggerty is he demanded not only a start, which you'd assume an All-American would start. He
Sure.
wants the point guard spot.
Yeah.
And he demonstrated his inability to play point guard against Colorado State.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand it's a one-game sample size, and I'm sure he could be a very effective point guard in the grand scheme of things. But
Right.
the teams that want PJ Haggerty are and have the money to give it to PJ Haggerty probably have the aspirations to win a national championship and the facility to do so.
Yeah.
And so if you have the ability to do so, I don't think you give $4 million to have a guy who's a shooting guard play point guard because your
Mm-hmm.
roster will be more well equipped than that. So I don't think he'll get the $4 million. That said, PJ Haggerty's a better basketball player, at least in the college level thus far in his career, than Rob Wright, who got $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make the case that he can find a spot, but that team is uniquely built because they have AJ DeBonsa, they have
Mm-hmm.
Richie Saunders. So, let's go get a point guard and shore this thing up. I don't know how many teams right now have the money to give it to them. I'm sure there's some, but also those teams that have the money likely have a roster that's built out already with a picture, an avenue of how they'll play. So I don't think he'll get quite that market value, but I do think he'll still be a hot commodity. The one that really intrigues me is RJ Lewis. Is he going to be a pro? Is he going to go to Auburn? And I think that's crazy, but uh, I'm very excited to see this. I don't love the way the NCAA is doing the transfer portal in some. I know this wasn't part of the question, but just a slight aside. I don't love the way this has become a bidding war. It's become restricted free agency. I don't like that you can say, like, name my price to play college basketball
Yeah.
now. But I will say it makes following the sport a more of a year-round thing, and someone who loves it, like myself, like you, like
Mm-hmm.
Isaac, it makes for roster building conversations to be fun and ever apparent. They're always
Mm-hmm.
necessary, and you say, well, this team's really well built, and now there's more strategy because you have to allot yourselves enough money and to build around the players you already have. And because now it's a guy like an All-American like BJ Aggerty can go in and you say, man, we missed out on him, but you don't have $4 million to give a guy like that. And now it's a bidding war. So I think there are some flaws with it, but it does become interesting, and the strategy behind it intrigues me.
Definitely flaws, but I am with you. It's entertaining. It's interesting. I think it's the coaches kind of were thrust into having this added element to their job, I think kind of unwillingly, which is part of the problem I have with it. It's like we didn't expect that we would have to do this and navigate all these different things. And certainly I think that's where those flaws come in, but it is fun. It is entertaining to kind of watch how it all shakes out, and even seeing like, okay, that team just added 2 transfers. So is somebody from their team going to suddenly enter the portal? And then you see, yes, one of their other players did enter the portal. And what does that mean? And it's just kind of this constant carousel of movement. And it's fascinating to watch, but also especially for fans who are used to, coming back to their roster being the same. And then, you're a Baylor fan and your entire team is gone and you're like, what happened? And we didn't even have a coaching change. And now it's just a whole new roster. So I understand the pros and cons, obviously, but hopefully it'll get a little bit more ironed out in the coming years and be a little bit smoother. But the coaches having to now be roster management in a way very different from what they used to do is certainly an interesting element to this, if nothing else. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Tons of other great players still in the transfer portal, and we will talk about them as they commit. We'll talk about them as we get updates on all of them going forward, because that's going to be the main conversation here on the show for the next couple of months at least. We'll also talk NBA draft. We'll talk way too early top 25s. We'll keep doing those. We'll get all these fun conversations coming your way here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. But again, that is going to wrap it up for us today. So we'll be back on Thursday with one more show, and then Isaac and I will be back with you all on Friday to get you into your weekend. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And of course, as always, peace out.